On a crowded bus, a young man publicly humiliates his elderly mother until an unexpected man, sitting in the back, decides to step in. His actions left everyone speechless. It was a cold, rainy night. The wet streets shimmered under the city lights while the sound of raindrops hitting the bus windows created a melancholic soundtrack inside the crowded vehicle, felt stifling with passengers lost in their own worlds. Some staring at their phones, others distracted by the hypnotic rhythm of the rain near the exit door. An elderly woman held a worn-out bag with trembling hands. Her gaze was downcast, her shoulders slumped as if bearing the weight of years of struggles and silence. Beside her, Nathan, her son in his early 20s, exuded frustration. He stood with arms crossed, tapping his foot impatiently on the floor. Nathan finally broke the silence with a sharp tone. "You always do this," he said, his voice dripping with irritation. He sighed loudly, rolling his eyes as he crossed his arms tighter. "You can't even remember one simple thing." The mother, trying to remain calm, responded softly. "I thought I had put it in the bag before," leaving Nathan abruptly, cut her off, raising his voice even more. "You ruin everything," he yelled, ignoring the glances from those around him. "That's why no one can stand you. That's why Dad left you." The impact of his words was the silence in the bus devastating. The mother clutched her bag to her chest, trying to conceal the pain reflected in her eyes. The passengers began exchanging uncomfortable looks, some indignant, others visibly unsettled. But no one said a word. The silence in the bus became almost suffocating. At the back of the bus, seated in a spot partially obscured by shadows, a figure watched the scene. Insolence. He didn't seem like just another passenger. His posture was calm, yet there was something about his presence that set him apart, even if most people didn't notice. As the tension in the air grew thicker, the camera slowly focused on that silhouette. Something was about to happen. Have you ever witnessed a situation like this where someone needed to step in? Share your story in the comments. Nathan seemed completely consumed by anger. Ignoring the growing discomfort around him, he gestured wildly. As he spoke, his abrupt movements drawing even more attention. "You don't understand how frustrating it is, Mom. Everything you ask you to do, you mess up. Always, always. The same thing." He paused briefly, but not to reflect, just to catch his breath before continuing. "And you think anyone respects you? Just look at yourself. Can't even leave the house without making a fool of yourself." The mother, still with her head bowed, clutched her worn-out bag tightly as if it were her only anchor. In that moment, her voice was barely audible as she tried once more to appease her son. "Nathan, please, you don't have to speak to me like this." Nathan rolled his eyes, almost laughing. "Oh, I don't have to. You know what your problem is, Mom. No one's ever put you in your place. Not even Dad could stand you." The tension inside the bus was palpable, almost visible in the heavy air that hung over the passengers. Some continued, pretending to be distracted, but others couldn't hide their expressions of discomfort. A teenage girl sitting in the aisle began recording with her phone, trying to be discreet. She murmured to her friend beside her, "This is going viral. Can you believe this? He's humiliating his own mother." An older man tugged at the brim of his hat, staring intently at the floor as if trying to contain his indignation. He shook his head, but remained silent. A middle-aged woman sitting next to her husband whispered, with a tone filled with anger, "How can he do that to his own mother?" Despite the reactions, no one seemed willing to intervene. It was as though shame and fear outweighed their outrage. Minutes dragged on as Nathan continued, and the passengers' discomfort turned into unbearable tension. A sharp turn caused the bus to lurch, and Nathan's mother grabbed onto a seat to keep from falling. Nathan, unfazed, took the opportunity to mock her further. "See, you can't even handle that. It's always me who has to fix everything." Always. Some passengers began shifting in their seats. Restless, a young man sitting closer to Nathan stared at him, furrowing his brow, but quickly looked away, returning his gaze to his phone. The mother, still trying to avoid a bigger confrontation, pleaded, "Once again, Nathan, let's talk about this at home, please." Nathan just shook his head, laughing bitterly. "Talk? You think you can talk to someone like you? It's impossible. You never listen, never learn." As Nathan kept talking, something in the atmosphere of the bus seemed to shift. The sound of the engine, once constant, seemed louder, blending with the rhythmic pounding of the rain. The passengers' awkward silence now felt like an anxious anticipation. Some faces began turning toward the back of the bus, where a figure until then motionless seemed to start reacting. He adjusted himself in, his seat moving slowly, almost as if calculating every motion. His presence, previously unnoticed now, drew subtle but undeniable attention. The mother, still silent, glanced quickly at her son, and then back to the floor. Nathan, on the other hand, was oblivious to the change in the atmosphere, entirely absorbed in his own anger. When someone finally decided to act, the impact would be greater than anyone there could have imagined. What would you do in a moment like this? Share your thoughts in the comments. The bus made another turn and the passengers clung to their seats, but the atmosphere felt even heavier. Nathan still glared at his mother with disdain. Though he spoke less now, the weight of his earlier words echoed throughout the space. Then, at the back of the bus, the mysterious figure who had remained silent until now rose from his seat. The movement was slow, but immediately captured everyone's attention. Those who had been distracted looked up. Those recording with their phones adjusted their cameras. He walked calmly down the aisle, his footsteps resonating even amidst the noise of the engine as he approached Nathan. His identity became unmistakable. It was Keanu Reeves, dressed simply in a dark coat with a serene but firm expression. The mother looked at him, startled, and Nathan, noticing the murmurs around him, turned abruptly to face the man. Keanu stopped just a few steps away, and with a calm yet authoritative tone began to speak the words, "You speak today. May be the last she remembers of you." He paused, locking eyes with Nathan. The silence that followed was almost deafening. Nathan rolled his eyes, trying to maintain a defensive stance. "Who do you think you are to butt in? This has nothing to do with you." Keanu remained unfazed, his voice retaining the same serenity. That contrasted sharply with the young man's anger. "You're right, I'm just another passenger, but that doesn't mean I can't see what's happening." Words spoken in anger can leave wounds that never heal. Nathan scoffed, still attempting to hold his ground. "You don't understand anything about our situation." Keanu leaned forward slightly, his gaze intense enough to make Nathan avert his eyes for a moment. "Understand? I don't need to know the details. What I see is a son emotionally tearing apart a woman who would likely give her life for him." He paused to let his words sink in, then turning his attention to Nathan's mother, he continued, "Look at her. Do you see the pain in her? Yes, this isn't just about today, do you? You think that pain started here on this bus?" Nathan looked uncomfortable but tried to justify himself. "She always messes things up, always, and I'm the one who ends up taking the blame for everything." Keanu raised a hand, signaling for Nathan to stop. "You're frustrated, that much is clear, but frustration doesn't give you the right to hurt someone who undoubtedly carried your pain when you were little. How many times has she protected you from something, even if you never knew? How many sacrifices has she made for you?" Nathan remained silent, his face a mix of anger, shame, and confusion. Keanu stood a little straighter, his voice gaining more weight. "Listen closely. Kid, the words you speak now can't be taken back. One day, you'll wake up and realize you no longer have the chance to apologize. You'll remember every word spoken in anger, and you'll wish you could say something different. And do you know what's worse? You won't get that chance. Time waits for no one." He stepped forward, gesturing slightly toward Nathan's mother. "She's alive today, breathing, looking at you with love. Even as you hurt her tomorrow, that might not be the case. What are you going to do with the time you still have?" The bus was completely silent. Some passengers had tears in their eyes. Nathan's mother stared at the floor, her hands trembling, not with anger, but with hope that her son would hear those words. Keanu took a step back and concluded, his voice carrying the weight of a universal truth. "You have the chance to change this now, but only you can make that choice. Choose wisely." The silence on the bus lingered, but it was no longer the same. It was a silence filled with emotion, reflection, and impact. Nathan fell silent. He looked at his mother, who still kept their head bowed, clutching her worn-out, the first-time bag tightly, as though it were her only shield against the world at that moment. For the first time, he didn't feel anger. When he looked at her, he felt a pang in his chest, A guilt too heavy to bear flashes of memories invaded his mind. The times his mother stood by his side, cheering. For his small victories at school the night she stayed awake, nursing him when he was sick and even. The days he pushed her away with irritation. Yet she remained steadfast, never giving up on him. Nathan's hardened expression began to soften, his shoulders slumped, and his posture shifted. He no longer resembled the angry young man who had boarded the bus. Taking a deep breath, he felt the ache in his chest deepen with each passing second. When he finally found the words, his voice was low, almost a whisper. "I'm sorry, Mom. I shouldn't have spoken to you like that. I should never speak to you like that." His mother slowly raised her. The forgiveness eyes surprised, her lips trembled as though trying to form words, but nothing came out. Instead, tears began to roll down her cheeks as she looked at her son, with a mixture of relief, hope, and an old pain that seemed to begin fading. Nathan averted his gaze for a moment, feeling small before her, but then something shifted within him. He reached out and gently placed his hand on her shoulder. A simple gesture, but one heavy with everything he didn't know how to express. "I promise, Mom. I'll do better for you." For me, his mother clasped his hand in hers, squeezing it tightly. Her touch wasn't just acceptance, it was forgiveness, a silent way of saying that despite everything, she still believed in him. The silence between them was heavy with unspoken emotion. Still holding her son's hand, the mother spoke, her voice trembling but sincere. "Nathan, I never wanted to hurt you. I only tried to do my best, maybe. Maybe my best wasn't enough, but I always wanted the best for you." Her words hit Nathan like a lightning. Bold tears welled up in his eyes, and he tried to hold them back. He couldn't. They rolled down slowly as he squeezed her hand tighter. "You did more than enough. Mom, it's me who's been wrong so many times." The two sat there holding hands as the bus continued its journey. It was as if the world around them had disappeared, leaving only that moment for both of them to heal. As the minutes passed, Nathan reflected on his actions. He thought about Keanu's words, and now for so long he had used his frustration as an excuse to hurt the person who cared about him the most. He realized he had been so focused on his own struggles that he never stopped to see how much his mother carried. She was older now, more fragile, yet she still tried every day to stand by his side. He looked at her again. This time he didn't just see his mother. He saw a woman who had sacrificed so much for him, and who, despite all the pain he had caused, still loved him unconditionally. Nathan wiped his eyes with the back of his hand and with a trembling voice said, "I won't disappoint you anymore, Mom. I promise I'll change." His mother smiled. The silence, this time a broader smile filled with hope. She gently rested her head on his shoulder as they continued to sit hand in hand. The silence on the bus was no different, a silence of respect, as if all the passengers had witnessed something profound and deeply human. Sometimes all it takes is a moment of clarity to realize what truly matters. Nathan had that moment that night, and for him and his mother, that bus became the beginning of something new, but something even more extraordinary happened. The passengers on the bus began reacting. A woman sitting near the window discreetly wiped her eyes and murmured to herself, "I need to call my mom when I get home." An older man who had been restless earlier stared out the window, clearly lost in thought. The teenager who'd been recording put her phone away and whispered to her friend, "That was different. I don't think I'll post it." The impact of Keanu's words and their connection between Nathan and his mother was palpable. It was as if the heavy atmosphere on the bus had been replaced by one of reflection and empathy. The bus stopped, and Keanu calmly walked toward the exit before stepping off. He turned and looked directly at Nathan. "Remember, we all make mistakes. What defines us is what we do to make things right." "Right." Nathan simply nodded, speechless, but his expression showed he understood. Keanu stepped off the bus and disappeared into the rainy night. Nathan and his mother remained sitting side by side now in silence, but it was a different kind of silence. It was a beginning. The camera showed the mother gently resting her head on her son's shoulder as he stared ahead, absorbing everything that had just happened. Have you ever experienced a moment that made you rethink your choices? Share your story in the comments. Sometimes your story can change someone else's life.